What happens when one of Hollywood's most straight-talking actors sits down with a seasoned journalist who thinks he can corner him with gotcha questions? You're about to witness one of the most explosive television moments in recent memory, where Mark Wahlberg absolutely loses it on George Stephanopoulos after the host crosses a line that should never be crossed. Before we dive into this incredible confrontation, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because this is the kind of raw, unfiltered content you won't see anywhere else. The tension was palpable from the moment Mark Wahlberg walked onto the set of This Week with George Stephanopoulos. The actor, known for his no-nonsense approach to interviews, had agreed to appear on the Sunday morning political talk show to discuss his latest film project and his philanthropic work in underserved communities. What he didn't expect was to be ambushed by a host who seemed more interested in stirring up controversy than having a genuine conversation. Stephanopoulos, sitting behind his polished desk with that familiar smirk, wasted no time in setting the tone. "Mark, thanks for joining us today. I have to ask, given your past, don't you think it's a bit hypocritical for you to be speaking about community outreach and helping at-risk youth?" Mark's jaw tightened slightly, but he maintained his composure. "George, I think my past is exactly why I'm qualified to speak about this. I've been where these kids are. I've made mistakes, I've learned from them, and now I'm trying to give back. But you've never really faced the full consequences of those mistakes, have you?" Stephanopoulos pressed, his voice taking on that condescending tone that veteran journalists often use when they think they've found their target. "I mean, let's be honest about what happened in your youth." "What exactly are you getting at, George?" Mark's voice remained steady, but there was a warning edge to it that anyone who knew him would recognize. Stephanopoulos leaned forward, clearly enjoying what he perceived as having the upper hand. "Well, there are those who would say that your charitable work now is just a way to buy your way out of guilt. A kind of celebrity penance, if you will." Mark shifted in his chair, his hands clasping together as he processed what was happening. "That's a pretty cynical way to look at someone trying to help kids, don't you think? But okay, let's talk about it. What specifically do you want to know?" "I think our viewers deserve to know the real Mark Wahlberg," Stephanopoulos continued, his tone becoming more aggressive. "Not the sanitized Hollywood version, but the person who had some very serious run-ins with the law as a teenager. George, I've never hidden from my past. I've talked about it openly in interviews for decades. I was a troubled kid who made bad choices. I've taken responsibility for that, I've made amends where I could, and I've spent the last 25 years trying to be a better person and help others avoid the mistakes I made." But Stephanopoulos wasn't satisfied with that answer. He had clearly come prepared for battle, armed with what he thought were damning details that would make for compelling television. "But Mark, when you were 16, you were involved in some very serious incidents. Incidents that many people would say deserve more than just an apology and some charity work." Mark's eyes narrowed. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "What are you trying to say, George? Because if you've got something to say, just say it." "I'm saying that maybe it's time for some real accountability." Stephanopoulos shot back, his voice rising slightly. "Time to stop hiding behind your Hollywood success and your charity work, and actually face the music." "Face the music?" Mark's voice was dangerously quiet now. "George, I don't know what kind of show you think you're running here, but I didn't come on to be lectured by someone who's never walked in my shoes." Stephanopoulos, sensing he was getting the reaction he wanted, doubled down. "But that's just it, Mark. Most people don't get to just walk away from their past like you have. Most people don't get second chances, third chances, fourth chances. You think I just walked away?" Mark's composure was starting to crack. "You think this has been easy? You think I haven't carried this with me every single day for 30 years? "Well, have you though?" Stephanopoulos challenged. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've done pretty well for yourself. Movies, restaurants, production companies, not exactly the life of someone who's been haunted by their past." Mark stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward. "You know what, George? I think I'm starting to understand what this is really about." "And what's that?" Stephanopoulos asked, clearly pleased with himself for getting such a strong reaction. "This isn't journalism. This isn't holding anyone accountable. This is you trying to tear someone down for ratings." Mark's Boston accent was getting thicker, a sure sign that his anger was building. "You brought me on here under false pretenses. I brought you on here to ask the tough questions that other interviewers won't ask. Stephanopoulos replied coolly. Tough questions? Mark laughed bitterly. George, you haven't asked me a single question about the work I'm actually doing. You haven't asked about the kids I'm trying to help or the programs we've started. All you want to do is relitigate something that happened when I was a teenager. Because it matters, Mark. Your past matters. Of course it matters, Mark exploded. But what matters more is what I've done with my life since then. What matters is the kids I'm helping now. What matters is the fact that I'm trying to prevent other kids from making the same mistakes I did. Stephanopoulos sensed he was losing control of the interview and decided to go for the kill. But Mark, don't you think those victims, the people you hurt, deserve more than just your charity work? Don't they deserve real justice? The studio fell completely silent. Even the camera operators seemed to hold their breath. Mark stared at Stephanopoulos for what felt like an eternity, his face cycling through a range of emotions: anger, hurt, disbelief. Finally, Mark spoke, his voice low and controlled, but with an unmistakable edge of fury. Real justice? George, let me tell you something about real justice. Real justice is when someone makes a mistake, owns up to it, serves their time, and then spends the rest of their life trying to make amends. Real justice isn't having some television host drag you through the mud 30 years later for ratings. Stephanopoulos wasn't backing down. If anything, Mark's reaction seemed to embolden him. But did you really serve your time, Mark? Because from what I understand, you got off pretty easy compared to what could have happened. Got off easy? Mark's voice cracked with disbelief. George, do you have any idea what you're talking about? Do you have any clue what my life was like back then? What led to those incidents? Crude. Lie. Marx, enlighten me, Stephanopoulos said with that same condescending tone, as if he were doing Mark a favor by letting him explain himself. Mark began pacing behind his chair, his hands gesturing as he spoke. I was 16 years old, George. 16. I was addicted to cocaine. I was living in a neighborhood where violence was a daily reality. I was angry, I was scared, and I was completely lost. That doesn't excuse what I did, but it explains it. A lot of people grow up in tough neighborhoods, Mark. They don't all assault innocent people. You're right, they don't, Mark acknowledged. And I've never said they do. I've never tried to excuse my actions or blame anyone else for them. But what I'm saying is that I was a different person then. I was a kid who was drowning, and I made terrible choices. Stephanopoulos leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying having Mark on the defensive. But those terrible choices had real consequences for real people. People who didn't ask to be part of your personal struggles. Mark stopped pacing and turned to face Stephanopoulos directly. Do you think I don't know that? Do you think I haven't thought about that every single day for the last 3 decades? Do you think I don't wish I could go back and change what happened? Wishing doesn't undo the damage, Mark. No, it doesn't, Mark agreed, his voice rising. But you know what does help? Working with kids who are in the same situation I was in, showing them that there's another way. Giving them opportunities that I didn't have. That's not buying my way out of guilt, George. That's taking responsibility. But Stephanopoulos wasn't finished. He had clearly done his research and had more ammunition to fire. Mark, I have to ask you about something specific. There was an incident when you were 16 where you allegedly threw rocks at a group of black children while shouting racial slurs. How do you reconcile that with your current image as someone who champions diversity and inclusion? The question hit Mark like a physical blow. His face went white, then red, then white again. The muscles in his jaw worked as he struggled to find words. George, that is not what happened. But something happened, didn't it? Yes, something happened, but not what you just described. Mark's voice was shaking now. Whether from anger or something else, it was hard to tell. And the fact that you would sit there and make accusations like that without knowing the full story tells me everything I need to know about what kind of journalist you really are. Stephanopoulos sensed blood in the water. So what is the full story, Mark? Because our research suggests that there were multiple incidents involving racial harassment. Your research? Mark laughed bitterly. George, your research is wrong. Dead wrong. And you know what's really sick about this? You're sitting there, trying to destroy someone's reputation based on incomplete information and rumors. These aren't rumors, Mark. These are documented incidents. Documented by who? Where? Show me the documentation, George. Show me exactly what you think you know. Stephanopoulos shuffled some papers on his desk, clearly not expecting to be challenged so directly. Mark, these incidents are part of the public record. Public record of what? Arrests? Charges? Convictions? Be specific, George. Because if you're going to sit there and accuse me of things, you better have your facts straight. I'm not accusing you of anything, Mark. I'm asking you about incidents that allegedly occurred. Allegedly, Mark repeated, his voice dripping with disgust. That's the key word, isn't it? Allegedly. You don't actually know what happened, do you? You're just throwing accusations around and hoping something sticks. Stephanopoulos was starting to look uncomfortable, but he pressed on. Mark, the point is that these allegations exist, and they paint a picture of someone who had some very troubling attitudes about race. Troubling attitudes about race? Mark's voice was getting louder now. George, let me tell you something about my attitudes about race. I grew up in Dorchester. I went to school with kids of every background you can imagine. My best friends were Black, Hispanic, Irish, Italian. The idea that I was running around throwing rocks at Black kids because of their race is not just wrong, it's insane. But Mark, if these incidents didn't happen the way they've been reported, why haven't you set the record straight before now? Because, George, I learned a long time ago that sometimes when you try to defend yourself against lies, people assume there must be some truth to them. Because I thought that my actions over the past 30 years spoke louder than rumors and gossip. Because I believed that people could see who I really am by looking at what I've actually done with my life. Stephanopoulos wasn't giving up. But don't you think the public has a right to know the truth about these incidents? The public? Mark laughed harshly. Or the ratings, George? Let's be honest about what this is really about. This is about accountability, Mark. No. This is about you trying to create a scandal where none exists. This is about you trying to tear down someone who's actually trying to do good in the world. The tension in the studio was reaching a breaking point. Mark's publicist, who had been standing just off camera, was making frantic gestures, trying to signal that the interview should end. But Mark wasn't done. You know what, George? Mark said, his voice suddenly calm in a way that was more unsettling than his anger had been. I think we need to talk about what's really happening here. Stephanopoulos straightened in his chair, perhaps sensing that the dynamic was about to shift dramatically. What do you mean? I mean, let's talk about you for a minute. Let's talk about your track record as a journalist. Let's talk about your credibility. Mark, I don't think that's relevant to this discussion. Oh, it's not? Mark's eyebrows shot up. You want to talk about accountability and truth-telling? Let's talk about the time you failed to disclose your donations to the Clinton Foundation while you were covering Hillary Clinton's campaign. Let's talk about your history of partisan hackery disguised as journalism. Stephanopoulos' face went pale. That's completely different, Mark. And frankly, it's not relevant to what we're discussing today. It's not different at all, George. It's about integrity. It's about honesty. It's about whether people can trust what you're saying. Mark was back to pacing. But now he seemed energized rather than defensive. You sit there questioning my character while your own professional conduct has been called into question multiple times. Mark, I think you're deflecting. Deflecting? Mark laughed, but there was no humor in it. George, I've answered every single one of your questions honestly. I've acknowledged my past mistakes. I've explained what I've done to make amends. What have you done? Have you ever acknowledged your mistakes? Have you ever apologized for misleading your viewers? Stephanopoulos was clearly rattled now, but he tried to maintain his composure. Mark, we're here to talk about you, not me. Why? Why can't we talk about you? You want to hold people accountable for their past actions? Let's start with you. Let's talk about your time in the Clinton White House and how that might affect your ability to report objectively on politics. That was decades ago, Mark. So were my mistakes, George. But apparently that doesn't matter to you when it comes to me. Apparently, I'm supposed to be defined forever by what I did as a troubled teenager, while you get to reinvent yourself as an objective journalist despite your obvious partisan leanings. The studio crew was clearly uncomfortable. Several producers were huddled together, whispering urgently. But Mark was just getting started. You know what the real difference is between us, George? When I screwed up, I hurt individuals. When you screw up, you misinform millions of people. When I made mistakes, I was a kid with addiction issues and no guidance. When you make mistakes, you're a grown man with every advantage in the world who should know better. Mark, I think we should wrap this up, Stephanopoulos said, clearly trying to regain control of the situation. Oh, now you want to wrap it up? When you were attacking me, you had all the time in the world. But now that I'm asking you some uncomfortable questions, suddenly we need to move on? The show has a time limit, Mark. The show has a time limit? Mark's voice was incredulous. George, you've been grilling me for 20 minutes about things that happened 30 years ago, but you can't spare 5 minutes to defend your own professional conduct? Stephanopoulos made the mistake of trying to regain the offensive. Mark, the difference is that I'm not the one being interviewed here. You are. And you're the one with the troubling past that needs to be addressed. That was the final straw. Mark stopped pacing and turned to face Stephanopoulos with a look of such intensity that the host actually leaned back in his chair. You can't say that, Mark said, his voice deadly quiet. I can't say what? You can't say that my past is more troubling than yours when you've spent your entire career misleading people. You can't sit there in judgment of me when you're no better than anyone else. And you certainly can't pretend that this ambush interview has anything to do with journalism or accountability. Mark, I think you're overreacting. Overreacting? Mark's voice exploded across the studio. Overreacting? George, you invited me on your show under false pretenses. You've spent the entire time trying to character assassinate me based on incomplete information and outright lies. You've ignored everything positive I've done with my life and focused solely on trying to destroy my reputation. And when I point out your own professional failings, suddenly I'm overreacting? Stephanopoulos was clearly in over his head now. Mark, I understand you're upset, but nothing, George. There is no but. You crossed a line today. You went from being a journalist to being a hitman. And the worst part is, you don't even have the integrity to own up to it. I was doing my job, Mark. Your job? Mark laughed bitterly. George, your job is supposed to be informing the public, not destroying people for entertainment. Your job is supposed to be seeking truth, not spreading innuendo and half-truths. Your job is supposed to be holding powerful people accountable, not ambushing guests who are trying to do good in the world. The studio had gone completely silent except for Mark's voice, which was now filled with a righteous anger that was impossible to ignore. You know what, George? I came here today to talk about helping kids. I came here to discuss programs that are actually making a difference in people's lives. I came here because I thought maybe, just maybe, we could have a real conversation about real issues. Instead, I got ambushed by someone who cares more about ratings than truth, more about controversy than journalism. Mark walked over to his chair and grabbed his jacket. I'm done here, George, and I want everyone watching to understand what they just witnessed. This wasn't journalism. This was a hit job. This was someone with his own credibility issues trying to tear down someone else to make himself feel better. As Mark headed toward the studio exit, Stephanopoulos made one final desperate attempt to salvage the interview. Mark, if you walk out now, people are going to think you have something to hide. Mark stopped and turned around one last time. George, the only thing I have to hide is my disappointment in what journalism has become. The only thing I'm ashamed of is that I believed you when you said you wanted to have a serious conversation about serious issues. And with that, Mark Wahlberg walked off the set of This Week, leaving George Stephanopoulos sitting alone at his desk, looking like a man who had just realized he'd bitten off far more than he could chew. What did you think of this explosive confrontation? Have you ever seen an interview go this wrong this fast? Drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more incredible moments like this one. What other celebrity interview would you like to see me break down next?